So one thing we've come to expect from Alabama at this point is that they're going to develop their players and send them to the NFL at a really high rate. And because of that, the question is always being asked: who are the names that are going to step up? Today, we aim to answer that question, but we're going to be focusing in on Alabama's sophomore class because there are several names that I think not only Alabama fans need to know, but the nation need to be aware of because I think they're set to make a big impact. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, Y for yes, N for no. Do you believe there are sophomores for the Crimson Tide set to make a major impact this season? And then let me know the names you're looking for. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, like and comment down below. And I want to see if we can get 50 subscribers from this video alone by Friday. And if we do, I'll be making a video with another Alabama content creator that I know y'all will love. But having said all that, let's jump right in because there are several names we need to talk about, but we're going to start with the names that are not going to surprise anybody first. And because of that, we're focusing in on two names to kick this off: Dallas Turner and Kool-Aid Mckinstry. And we're going to start in the secondary with Kool-Aid Mckinstry. A former five-star who was a huge win for Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide, Kool-Aid Mckinstry came into the action at the latter portion of last season, and he has really positive experience. If you look at the games he played in, those games meant so much. There was no better time in the season for a freshman to come in and see live action than when Kool-Aid came in. And because of that, I think that's going to translate over to this upcoming season really well. On top of that, he's just got another year in the system, another year understanding what it takes to be successful, but maybe more importantly, another year to gel with the other members of the Crimson Tide secondary. Because with Jordan Battle and DeMarco Hellams coming back, that secondary could be a really strong portion of this team, and the communication is going to be of the utmost importance. Because when I was going back and watching film of Kool-Aid, there was a lot you loved. You could see his physicality off the rip. He didn't shy away from contact, but anytime he got beat, the one thing I realized is a lot of it stemmed from miscommunication, and it made complete sense because he hadn't been playing all season. He was a true freshman that came in relief of an injury, so it makes sense in that situation where you have breakdowns in the communication of your secondary. But going into year two, I think a lot of that's going to be shored up, and I think he is really set to have a huge rise this season. But a name we must talk about if we're talking about risers this season is Dallas Turner. Because Dallas Turner, I believe, is set to become a household name his sophomore season. Look, this is someone who didn't start the entirety of Alabama's season and actually came in relief of Drew Sanders, who came in relief of Chris Allen. But that didn't stop Dallas Turner from putting up a hyper-productive season. Last year, accounting for 8.5 sacks, a number I think is only going to go up. And the reason is simple: because he has Will Anderson on the other side of him. That's going to open up more one-on-one opportunities than someone like Dallas Turner should face because you just can't double everybody. If in the event that offenses try and double Dallas and Will, well, the interior of Alabama's defensive line is just going to eat it up, and the linebackers are going to be free to do pretty much, well, whatever they want. And so I just don't see that being a possibility. Because of that, he's going to be put in a lot of one-on-one situations, and he's going to be able to take advantage of that. I think this is a name that is going to be a huge impact player for the Crimson Tide this year, but those are the easy names. Now let's get into some names that I think are going to make an impact and we need to talk about that may not be as well known. And because of that, we're now going to switch over to the offensive side of the football and talk about some of the wide receivers that Alabama got. Because no matter whether we're talking about Jakory Brooks, Jojo Earl, or Christian Leary, there is a lot to love about every single one of those names. Alabama did great work in the transfer portal, going and getting Jermaine Burton as well as adding in Tyler Harrell, but Alabama lost in terms of wide receiver production and experience, and I think that the second is more important. The experience those receivers had, because John Mechie was someone who'd been in the system for a while. Even though Jamison was only there for year one, he provided so much in terms of juice, both in terms of what he could do with his game-breaking speed, but also the energy he brought to the team that was infectious, is going to be tough to replicate and needs to be replicated. But then you look at a Slade Bolden, who may not have had the athletic acumen of a Jamison Williams, but was just a solid player that had a supreme understanding of what he needed to do. Alabama's going to look to try and replicate not only the production, but the sureness of that wide receiver room. And because of that, those three names are names that I wouldn't be surprised to see any of them make an impact. For Jakory Brooks, this was a name that was called upon when Alabama's back was against the wall, and he made a play. That, I think, is going to carry over into this year. He's got a ton of talent. He's a bigger-bodied wide receiver, and I think he's going to be utilized and make plays this season. If we look at a Jojo Earl, this is someone who Nick Saban was supremely high on Earl's freshman season, and he was seeing playing time before his injury. Now, the last time we saw Earl, he had several drops in A-Day, something that must be cleaned up, but the one thing you realize, he gets a lot of separation out of his routes. He has got a ton of moves once he gets the ball in his hand, and if he can clean up the drops, he is going to be a dangerous weapon for this Crimson Tide, especially in the slot position where I think they're going to aim to try and tear defenses apart. But if we're talking about a slot wide receiver that can tear defenses up, Christian Leary had as good of an A-Day as any member of the Alabama Crimson Tide and really put himself in prime position to be able to make an impact this season. Leary had a day in that scrimmage, accounting for touchdowns, big plays, you name it, he was there. And I think he's someone that the Crimson Tide fan base cannot forget. He has got game-breaking speed, and we've heard Nick Saban religiously talk about the need for speed on the outside. This is someone who has that. It's someone who's been in the system. This is year 2, and they had a big spring game. I think Christian Leary is a name that could surprise a whole lot of people. But sticking on the offensive side of the ball, we need to talk about the offensive line, because I've said consistently my biggest question mark for the Crimson Tide going into this season is the offensive line. It was a shaky offensive line last year, and they lose a top 10 draft pick in Evan Neal. Now, the new coaching hire of Coach Walford will be a huge addition to this offensive line. You can see a statistical upgrade from everywhere he's gone, something that I'm really looking forward to for Alabama. But what names do we need to pay attention to? And for me, this one is kind of simple. It's J.C. Latham. J.C. Latham had some playing time last season, had a lot of solid playing time in the A-Day game, and I think he's going to take this offseason to continue learning. Remember, I talk consistently about how I'm never surprised if an offensive lineman doesn't start year 1, especially in the circumstances that class faced, because they were the COVID class. At the end of the day, with J.C. Latham having another year in the system, another year understanding what needs to be done, and another year in the strength and conditioning program, he's going to be a name that's called upon to try and shore up this Alabama offensive line. And that's going to be a big deal, because we know Alabama has got a ton in terms of running back talent. They have the former Heisman winner in Bryce Young, who is phenomenal and is only going to be getting better this season, and they have a lot of talent at wide receiver. They may not have the experience, but the talent is there. It's all up to the offensive line. If the offensive line shows up and provides Bryce Young time, this offense is going to be dangerous. And because of that, J.C. Latham is a name we need to keep at the forefront of our mind. And you might be asking yourself, well, what about Tommy Brockermeyer, another 5-star we got in the same class? I think Tommy Brockermeyer's film is great coming out of high school, but according to Nick Saban, he had some injuries last season that kept him sidelined for a greater portion of that season, and now he's working back through. J.C. Latham didn't have to experience those same setbacks, or if he did, I'm at least not aware of them. So that is something to keep in mind, but I think J.C. Latham is a name we need to keep at the forefront of our minds. And now let's switch over to the defensive side of the football, because there's opportunities on the defensive line for some names to make an impact. Payne, the former 5-star, could be set to see an increased role this season because of the production lost on the interior, with Mathis and LeBrian Ray no longer being there. Mathis had a lot of production for the Crimson Tide, and that's an area where Nick Saban is going to look to try and at least replicate the impact he gave this defense, especially with the two guys they have on the outside. If they can replicate that production from the interior, this defensive front for Alabama is going to be fantastic, mark my words. But Payne's not the only one. Monkel Goodwin is another name we need to be aware of that could make an impact. And finally, the last position we need to talk about is the position right next to Henry To'oTo'o. Because even though Jalen Moody looks to be the guy to shore up the other inside linebacker position, we need to talk about the name behind Jalen Moody. Because Deontay Lawson is a name that Crimson Tide fans have been excited about. He came on campus, had a great A-Day, and showed he's got all the ability to be able to play the inside linebacker position. The hard part is experience. Jalen Moody has a supreme understanding of what is necessary to be successful at that position because he's been in the system so long. We already know the massive importance that inside linebackers have for a defense. And so that's a position that Jalen Moody's a fantastic football player, and his experience combined with that is sure to have Alabama fans feeling better about their inside linebacker position, but you have to feel great when the depth behind Jalen Moody looks like a Deontay Lawson. Another name I want to mention as an honorable mention that could make an impact, it's just the room they're in is loaded, is Terrion Arnold. This is a guy who I think could make an impact at any position in the secondary. He is that gifted. It's just this is a secondary that is supremely loaded. Whenever you're talking about the safety position, the money position, there's just so many names to know, and Terrion Arnold is a guy who could easily play his way onto the field because of the ability he has. So those are the names I think we need to keep up with. I think these guys are set to have an impact, and especially Dallas Turner and Kool-Aid Mckinstry. I think at the end of the year, we'll look back on this video and talk about how those two guys had huge seasons, but I certainly don't expect them to be alone. That's it. Hop down in the comments. Let me know the list you're watching out for Alabama sophomores set to make a big impact. That's it. See ya.